Elderly woman stops the euthanasia of a sick police dog, and what happens next moves everyone to tears. The morning bustle at the San Diego Police Department's K9 unit was particularly intense that day. In a corner of the kennel, Rex, a Belgian, Malinois with slightly weathered fur, rested peacefully, unaware that his fate had been sealed. For years, this remarkable dog had served with unwavering loyalty, detecting dangers, rescuing victims, and protecting his fellow officers. However, now, after being diagnosed with a degenerative condition affecting his mobility, he had been deemed unfit for service. If this story caught your attention, don't forget to subscribe to our channel and give it a like. Let us know which city you're watching from. Let's keep going. The decision was final. He would be put down. No alternatives had been considered, as maintaining a sick animal was viewed as a waste of resources and space. For many at the department, it was merely protocol, a necessary procedure. The bureaucratic machine moved forward with cold efficiency, treating Rex's situation as just another item on their daily checklist. Margaret Thompson, a 73-year-old retired veterinary nurse who had been following the routines of that police unit for years, found this decision absolutely unacceptable. Known in the community for her dedication to animal welfare and her past as a rescue volunteer, she couldn't comprehend how a four-legged hero could be discarded like a worthless object. Upon learning what was about to happen, she decided to take action. Initially, Margaret attempted to intervene directly with the officers in charge. She approached Captain Richard Stevens, the unit supervisor, arguing that Rex deserved to live out his remaining days with dignity. However, she was met with cold stares and bureaucratic responses. "Mrs. Thompson," Captain Stevens had said, his voice devoid of emotion, "we appreciate your concern, but this is standard procedure. We can't make exceptions." Undeterred by the initial rejection, Margaret began an impromptu campaign. Using her contacts and the power of social media, she shared Rex's story. Her granddaughter Sarah helped her create a compelling post that quickly went viral. Within hours, the story of the condemned police dog spread throughout the city, attracting the attention of journalists, activists, and animal lovers alike. Local veterinarians, including Dr. James Anderson from the prestigious Pacific Coast Veterinary Center, offered to examine Rex, stating there were viable alternatives to euthanasia. Lawyers began discussing the legality of the decision, while ordinary citizens protested against what they saw as a heartless measure. The situation reached a critical point when Officer Michael Cooper, Rex's former handler, who had served alongside him for 5 years, decided to speak up. In an emotional video that quickly went viral, he recalled moments where Rex had been crucial to the team, preventing tragedies and saving countless lives. "Rex isn't just a police dog," Cooper had said, his voice breaking with emotion. "He's a partner, a hero, and above all, a living being who deserves better than this." The public pressure intensified, but the authorities remained resistant. Captain Stevens and the department brass insisted there were no precedents for changing such a decision. They cited budget constraints, liability concerns, and department policies, creating a wall of bureaucratic resistance that seemed impenetrable. Margaret watched as the days passed and Rex's deadline approached. She couldn't sleep, haunted by thoughts of this loyal servant being discarded so callously. Her nights were spent researching alternatives, making calls, and trying to find someone who would listen. But as each attempt met with failure, she realized that conventional methods wouldn't be enough to save Rex. In her modest home in the suburbs of San Diego, surrounded by photos of the many animals she had helped over the years, Margaret began to formulate a plan. She knew it was risky, perhaps even foolish for someone her age, but she couldn't stand by and watch this injustice unfold. As she looked at a particular photo on her wall, one showing her late husband, a former police officer himself, standing proudly with his canine partner, she knew what she had to do. The next morning, Margaret put her plan into motion. She visited the police station one last time, ostensibly to make a final plea, but this time she was watching, observing, and gathering information. She noted the security patterns, the staff rotations, and most importantly, the location of every camera. To anyone watching, she was just a persistent old lady, making another futile attempt to change minds. But behind her gentle exterior, Margaret Thompson was preparing for the most daring action of her life. The sun had barely risen over San Diego when Margaret Thompson began implementing her audacious plan. She had spent the previous night preparing everything meticulously, drawing from years of experience working with animal rescue organizations. Her modest ranch-style house, located in the outskirts of the city, had been transformed into a temporary sanctuary, complete with all the medical supplies and comfort items Rex might need. Sarah, her 24-year-old granddaughter, had initially tried to talk her out of it. "Grandma, there has to be another way," she had pleaded. "What you're planning, it could get you into serious trouble." But Margaret had simply smiled, her eyes twinkling with determination. "Sometimes, sweetheart, doing what's right means taking risks. Your grandfather taught me that." In the pre-dawn hours, Margaret drove her old Toyota Camry to the police station. She had chosen this time carefully, knowing from her observations that the night shift would be ending and the morning shift wouldn't have fully settled in yet. The transition period always created a brief window of reduced vigilance. She parked her car in the far corner of the lot, away from the security cameras she had carefully mapped during her previous visits. In her bag, she carried several items that would help her accomplish her mission: a fresh bag of premium dog treats, a leash, and most importantly, her old volunteer ID badge from the San Diego Animal Rescue Center. Though expired, it still looked official enough to avoid immediate suspicion. As she approached the K9 unit building, Margaret's heart raced, but her hands remained steady. Years of handling emergency situations at the veterinary clinic had taught her to stay calm under pressure. She walked with purpose, projecting the confidence of someone who belonged there. The night guard, Tommy, had seen her so many times over the past weeks that he barely glanced up from his crossword puzzle as she passed. Inside the building, the fluorescent lights hummed softly overhead as Margaret made her way to the kennel area. She could hear the occasional whimper and rustling from the dogs in their enclosures. The sound brought back memories of her years working in animal rescue, memories that only strengthened her resolve. Rex recognized her immediately. Despite his condition, his tail wagged slightly as she approached his kennel. Over the past weeks, Margaret had made a point of visiting him regularly, building trust and familiarity. She had also befriended several of the junior officers and kennel staff, learning their routines and gaining their confidence. Officer Jenny Martinez, a young rookie who had recently joined the K9 unit, was particularly sympathetic to Margaret's cause. That morning, Jenny was conveniently occupied with paperwork in the front office, giving Margaret the window of opportunity she needed. The security cameras in the kennel area had been temporarily malfunctioning since the previous evening. A fortunate coincidence that Jenny had mentioned to Margaret the day before, with a knowing look. As Margaret opened Rex's kennel, her hands trembled slightly, but her voice remained steady and soothing. "Come on, boy," she whispered, attaching the leash to his collar. "It's time to go." Rex followed her willingly, his trust in her evident in every step. Despite his degenerative condition, he moved with surprising grace, as if sensing the importance of staying quiet and calm. The walk to her car felt like an eternity. Margaret maintained a casual pace, nodding to the few officers she passed. Most of them were familiar with her presence around the K9 unit and assumed she was simply taking Rex for one of her regular walks. an activity that had been unofficially tolerated due to her reputation and persistence. As they reached her car, Margaret helped Rex into the back seat, where she had prepared a comfortable bed of blankets. Her hands shook as she started the engine, but her determination never wavered. She pulled out of the parking lot slowly, maintaining a normal speed to avoid attracting attention. Only when she was several blocks away did she allow herself to breathe normally again. Looking in the rearview mirror, she saw Rex lying peacefully in the back seat, his eyes fixed trustingly on her. In that moment, Margaret knew that regardless of the consequences, she had made the right choice. But she also knew that this was just the beginning. The real challenges lay ahead, and she would need all her resources and connections to protect Rex from what was coming. The news of Rex's disappearance spread through the San Diego Police Department like wildfire. Captain Stevens arrived at the station that morning to find his normally orderly K-9 unit in complete disarray. Security footage from the previous night showed sporadic gaps in coverage, and the night shift staff seemed suspiciously vague about their observations. Officer Jenny Martinez sat at her desk, maintaining a carefully neutral expression as she filed her morning reports. Inside, however, her heart raced with every passing moment. She hadn't directly helped Margaret Thompson, but she had deliberately looked the other way. As a rookie officer, she struggled with the conflict between her duty to the department and her conscience. The media caught wind of the story almost immediately. Local news channels interrupted their morning broadcasts with breaking news about the missing police dog. Sarah Thompson watched the coverage from her apartment, her stomach in knots as she thought about her grandmother's daring act. She had already received 3 calls from her mother, Elizabeth, who was beside herself with worry about Margaret's actions. Meanwhile, Margaret and Rex had arrived at their destination, a small ranch property in Alpine, about 30 miles east of San Diego. The property belonged to Dr. James Anderson, the veterinarian who had offered to examine Rex earlier. The good doctor had converted his guest house into a rehabilitation center for retired service animals, though few knew about this aspect of his work. "Margaret," Dr. Anderson said as he helped Rex out of the car, "I've known you for 20 years, but I never expected you to pull something like this." His tone carried equal measures of admiration and concern. "We'll need to be careful. This situation could escalate quickly." Inside the guest house, Dr. Anderson conducted a thorough examination of Rex. The dog's degenerative condition was serious, but far from hopeless. With proper treatment and physical therapy, he could have several good years ahead of him, the veterinarian concluded. The department's decision was premature and, frankly, unnecessary. As Rex settled into his temporary home, Margaret's phone buzzed constantly with messages and calls. The story had exploded on social media, with that "Save Rex" trending locally. Her granddaughter Sarah, a social media manager by profession, had been carefully managing the online narrative, ensuring that the focus remained on the ethical implications of the department's policies rather than on her grandmother's actions. Officer Michael Cooper, Rex's former handler, found himself in an impossible position. As a police officer, he knew he should report any information he had about Rex's whereabouts. As a person who had worked closely with the dog for years, he understood and secretly supported Margaret's actions. When questioned by his superiors, he maintained that he had no knowledge of the dog's location, though he had his suspicions. The police department's public relations team struggled to manage the situation. They couldn't ignore the violation of protocol, but heavy-handed enforcement against a beloved elderly community figure would be a PR nightmare. Captain Stevens faced mounting pressure from both his superiors and the public. Local news outlets began digging into the department's policies regarding retired K-9 officers, uncovering a pattern of cold efficiency that didn't sit well with the community. Dr. Anderson's wife, Clara, brought dinner to the guest house that evening, finding Margaret sitting beside Rex's bed, gently stroking his fur. "You've started something big, Margaret," Clara said, setting down the food tray. "The phone hasn't stopped ringing all day. Other departments across the state are being asked about their K-9 retirement policies." Margaret looked up, her eyes tired but determined. "I couldn't let them do it, Clara. Not to him, not to any of them." She reached for her phone, which showed dozens of missed calls, including several from Elizabeth, her daughter. "I know there will be consequences, but sometimes you have to take a stand." As night fell over the ranch, the story continued to grow. Local animal rights organizations began organizing protests outside the police department. Retired K-9 handlers from across the country shared their own stories of struggling with inadequate support for their four-legged partners. What had started as one woman's desperate attempt to save a single dog was rapidly evolving into a movement for systemic change. The morning sun cast long shadows across Dr. Anderson's ranch as Margaret sat on the porch of the guest house, sipping her morning coffee. Rex lay at her feet, his condition already showing slight improvement after just a few days of proper care and attention. The peaceful scene, however, belied the growing storm surrounding their situation. Elizabeth Thompson, Margaret's daughter and Sarah's mother, arrived at the ranch unannounced. A successful corporate lawyer in Los Angeles, she had driven down as soon as she could get away from work. Her normally perfectly styled hair was slightly disheveled, betraying her anxiety about the situation. "Mom," Elizabeth began, her voice tight with concern, "do you realize what you've done? The department is under immense pressure to take action. They can't just let this go." She paced the porch, her heels clicking against the wooden boards. "I've been getting calls from reporter friends in LA. This story is going national." Margaret remained calm, reaching down to scratch behind Rex's ears. "Lizzie, do you remember what your father used to say? Sometimes the right path is not the easy one. I couldn't stand by and watch them discard him like a broken tool." Her voice carried the quiet conviction that Elizabeth remembered from childhood, the same tone her mother had used when standing up to school boards and local authorities over various causes through the years. Inside the house, Dr. Anderson was on a conference call with several colleagues from other veterinary clinics across the country. The Rex situation had sparked a broader discussion about the treatment of retired service animals. Veterinarians nationwide were offering to provide free or reduced-cost care for retired K-9 officers, creating a network of support that had never existed before. Sarah, meanwhile, was managing the growing social media campaign from her apartment in San Diego. The hashtag #SaveRex had evolved into #Service Dog Rights, and she was coordinating with animal rights organizations to maintain momentum while keeping the message positive and focused on change rather than confrontation. Officer Jenny Martinez spent her lunch break scrolling through the comments on various news articles about the situation. Her conscience had been troubling her, torn between her duty as an officer and her belief in Margaret's cause. She had already been questioned twice about the security camera malfunction, and maintaining her composure was becoming increasingly difficult. The pressure was also mounting at the police department. Captain Stevens faced criticism from both sides. His superiors demanded action to maintain order and protocol, while the public and many of his own officers sympathized with Margaret's actions. The situation had become a powder keg of emotions and principles, with no clear resolution in sight. That afternoon, a group of retired K-9 handlers organized a peaceful demonstration outside the police department. They brought their former partners, now beloved pets, creating a powerful image that news cameras couldn't resist. Local news stations broadcast live from the scene, interviewing handlers who shared stories of their own struggles with the system's cold approach to retiring service dogs. As the sun began to set, Elizabeth sat with her mother on the porch, their earlier tension softened by hours of conversation and shared memories. "You know, Mom," Elizabeth said, watching Rex doze peacefully nearby, Dad would have been proud of what you're doing. He always said you had more courage than sense." She smiled, reaching for her mother's hand. "But I'm worried about what comes next. The department can't ignore this forever." Margaret squeezed her daughter's hand, her eyes fixed on the horizon. "I know, dear, but sometimes you have to stand your ground, even when you're scared. These animals give everything for us. The least we can do is give them dignity in return." She paused, considering her next words carefully. "Whatever comes next, I know I did the right thing, and sometimes that has to be enough." As night fell over the ranch, the hashtag Service Dog Rights had reached over 1 million mentions nationwide. Sarah's phone buzzed constantly with messages from media outlets requesting interviews and supporters offering help. What had started as one woman's act of defiance was rapidly becoming a national conversation about loyalty, compassion, and the true meaning of service. The story took an unexpected turn when Congressman James Whitaker, a former K-9 handler himself, caught wind of the situation. He had been following the developments closely, and the morning news coverage of the retired handler's demonstration struck a personal chord. Without announcing his intentions, he boarded a flight from Washington, D.C. to San Diego. Meanwhile, at Dr. Anderson's ranch, Margaret was working with Rex on his physical therapy exercises. Dr. Anderson had developed a specialized program that was already showing promising results. The old dog's movements, while still limited, were becoming more fluid and less painful. Every small improvement felt like a victory, reinforcing Margaret's conviction that she had made the right choice. "You're doing great, boy," Margaret encouraged. As Rex completed another set of gentle exercises, Dr. Anderson watched from nearby, taking notes on the dog's progress. Clara Anderson brought out a tray of lemonade, her presence a constant source of support in what had become an increasingly complex situation. Sarah's social media campaign had evolved into something much larger than anyone had anticipated. She had connected with K-9 handler associations across the country, collecting stories of other service dogs who had faced similar situations. The narrative was shifting, from a single act of civil disobedience to a nationwide movement for reform. Elizabeth, who had decided to work remotely from the ranch for a few days, was on a conference call with several animal rights lawyers who had offered their services pro bono. They were discussing potential legal frameworks for protecting retired service animals when her phone buzzed with a news alert. Her eyes widened as she read the headline. "Mom!" Elizabeth called out, rushing to the porch where Margaret was resting after Rex's therapy session. "Congressman Whitaker is holding a press conference outside the San Diego Police Department. He's talking about Rex." The television in the guest house came to life as they tuned into the local news. Congressman Whitaker, standing before a crowd of reporters and supporters, spoke with passionate conviction. "As a former K-9 handler, I understand the bond between these officers and their four-legged partners," he declared. "These dogs aren't just equipment to be discarded when they can no longer serve. They are heroes who deserve our respect and care." Captain Stevens watched the press conference from his office, his expression unreadable. The arrival of a congressman had changed the dynamics dramatically. His phone hadn't stopped ringing since morning, with calls from the mayor's office, the police commissioner, and various media outlets. Officer Jenny Martinez felt a weight lift from her shoulders as she listened to the congressman's words. The conflict between her duty and her conscience was finding resolution in the growing support for change. She thought about the security and camera footage, or rather the lack thereof, and allowed herself a small smile. Back at the ranch, Dr. Anderson received an unexpected call from the American Veterinary Association. They were interested in using Rex's case as a catalyst for establishing a nationwide program for retired service animals. The conversation lasted over an hour, with Dr. Anderson sharing his expertise and vision for what such a program could accomplish. Margaret sat with Rex in the afternoon sun, reflecting on how their simple story had grown into something so much bigger. She thought about all the other service dogs out there, faithful partners who deserved better than a cold, bureaucratic ending. The movement she had inadvertently started was giving voice to a concern that had long been ignored. Elizabeth approached her mother, holding her tablet displaying dozens of supportive messages from across the country. "Mom, look at this," she said, scrolling through the comments. "People are sharing stories of their own service dogs, offering homes for retired K9s, even starting fundraisers for medical care. You've started something remarkable." As the day progressed, Congressman Whitaker's involvement brought national media attention to the issue. Major news networks picked up the story, featuring interviews with retired handlers, veterinarians, and animal welfare experts. The conversation was no longer about one dog and one woman's act of defiance. It had become a discussion about national policy and institutional change. The San Diego Morning News was dominated by coverage of Congressman Whitaker's impromptu visit to the police department. The congressman had spent the previous evening meeting with various stakeholders, including Captain Stevens and the police commissioner. His presence had transformed what began as a local controversy into a national dialogue about the treatment of service animals. At Dr. Anderson's ranch, Margaret was surprised by an early morning visitor. Officer Michael Cooper, Rex's former handler, had finally decided to take a stand. He arrived just as the sun was rising, having driven through the night after his shift ended. When Rex heard his former partner's voice, his tail began to wag with renewed energy. "I couldn't stay silent anymore," Cooper explained to Margaret as they watched Rex hobble excitedly around the yard. "Seeing him like this, still full of life, still fighting, it proves we were wrong. The department was wrong." His voice cracked slightly as Rex pressed against his leg, seeking attention. "He saved my life 3 times during our partnership. I owe him this much." Sarah was coordinating with national media outlets from her apartment, barely keeping up with the flood of interview requests. Her social media campaign had caught the attention of several celebrities who had begun sharing Rex's story with their millions of followers. The hashtag #MashaServiceDogRights had evolved into a full-fledged movement, with people sharing stories and photos of service dogs from across the country. Elizabeth, putting her legal expertise to work, had spent the morning drafting a proposal with a team of animal rights lawyers. They were creating a framework for new legislation that would protect retired service animals and ensure they received proper care after their duties ended. Congressman Whitaker's office had already expressed interest in reviewing the proposal. At the police department, Captain Stevens found himself in a challenging position. The pressure from above was mounting, but not in the way he had expected. Instead of demands for punitive action, his superiors were now asking him to help develop new protocols for retiring K9 officers. The public relations nightmare had transformed into an opportunity for positive change. Officer Jenny Martinez was finally able to breathe easier. The arrival of Congressman Whitaker and the shifting tide of public opinion had changed the focus from finding the person responsible for Rex's disappearance to addressing the systemic issues that had led to the situation. She found herself being consulted on potential reforms, her experience with the K9 unit suddenly valued in a new way. Dr. Anderson's ranch had become an unlikely command center for the growing movement. Veterinarians from neighboring cities visited to observe his rehabilitation techniques with Rex, while animal welfare organizations sent representatives to discuss the possibility of establishing a network of retirement facilities for service animals. Clara Anderson had turned the ranch's large kitchen into a hub of activity, serving coffee and meals to the steady stream of visitors. She watched with quiet pride as her husband shared his expertise with colleagues and advocates, his decades of experience finally finding a broader platform for change. That afternoon, a special delivery arrived at the ranch, a package from a retired canine handler in Montana. Inside was a custom-made orthopedic bed for Rex, along with a letter sharing a similar story of a service dog who had been given a second chance. It was just one of many gestures of support that had begun pouring in from across the country. Margaret sat on the porch, watching Rex interact with Officer Cooper. The dog's condition had notably improved under Dr. Anderson's care, his movements more confident despite his limitations. Cooper had brought his phone, showing Margaret videos of their time together on the force, each clip a testament to Rex's dedication and skill. "You know," Cooper said, his eyes fixed on Rex, "when I first heard what you'd done, I was conflicted. Part of me wanted to follow protocol, do things by the book." He paused, reaching down to scratch Rex's ears. "But seeing him now, seeing all of this..." He gestured to the activity around the ranch. "You didn't just save Rex, Mrs. Thompson. You're helping us save all of them." As evening approached, Elizabeth returned from a video conference with Congressman Whitaker's legal team. The legislation they were drafting had gained significant support, with several other representatives expressing interest in co-sponsoring the bill. What had started as one woman's act of defiance was rapidly becoming enshrined in law. The momentum of the movement continued to build as more influential voices joined the cause. Victoria Bennett, a renowned animal rights activist and documentary filmmaker, arrived at Dr. Anderson's ranch with a small crew. She had been following Rex's story and saw an opportunity to shed light on a largely overlooked issue in public service. "Your story needs to be told properly," Victoria explained to Margaret as they sat in the ranch's living room. "Not just Rex's journey, but the bigger picture. How one person's courage can spark real change." Rex lay at Margaret's feet, his breathing steady and calm, seemingly unaware that he had become a symbol for something much larger than himself. Elizabeth had spent the morning in virtual meetings with legislators from different states. The proposed bill, now being called the K9 Heroes Care Act, was gaining bipartisan support. It would mandate comprehensive health care and retirement, plans for all service dogs, ensuring they received the dignity and care they deserved after their years of service. Sarah's social media campaign had evolved into a full-fledged non-profit organization. With help from other digital activists and animal welfare experts, she had created the Service Dog Retirement Foundation. The organization would serve as a resource center and advocacy group for retired service animals and their handlers. At the San Diego Police Department, Captain Stevens had undergone a remarkable transformation. After seeing the overwhelming public response and hearing countless stories from handlers across the country, he began actively participating in the reform process. His experience and insight proved valuable in crafting practical solutions that would work within department structures while prioritizing the animal's welfare. "I've been in law enforcement for 25 years, Stevens admitted during a meeting with Congressman Whitaker. "Sometimes we get so caught up in protocols and procedures that we forget the heart of what we do." Mrs. Thompson reminded us of that. The captain's change of heart had influenced other departments across the country to review their own policies. Officer Jenny Martinez had found her voice in the movement. Her unique perspective as a young officer in the K9 unit made her an invaluable contributor to the ongoing discussions about reform. She worked closely with Elizabeth and the legal team, helping them understand the day-to-day realities of K9 operations and how best to implement the proposed changes. Dr. Anderson's rehabilitation program for Rex had become a model for other veterinarians. He hosted a workshop at the ranch, demonstrating his techniques to colleagues from across the region. Rex, despite his condition, proved to be an excellent patient, showing remarkable improvement under the doctor's care. "The key is understanding that each dog is unique," Dr. Anderson explained to the gathered veterinarians. These animals have given years of service, often in high-stress situations. Their retirement care needs to be tailored to their specific needs and experiences. His words resonated with the attending professionals, many of whom had treated service dogs throughout their careers. Clara Anderson had organized a community support network, connecting with local businesses and residents who wanted to help. Pet supply stores donated equipment, local farmers contributed fresh food, and retired handlers offered their time and expertise. The ranch had become more than just a safe haven for Rex. It was a blueprint for what service dog retirement could look like. Margaret found herself at the center of this whirlwind of activity, yet she remained focused on Rex's well-being. Every morning, she worked with him through his therapy exercises, celebrating each small victory in his recovery. The bond between them had grown stronger, built on trust and shared determination. Officer Cooper spent his off-duty hours at the ranch, working with Rex and sharing stories with the documentary crew. His testimony about their years together on the force provided powerful evidence for why the proposed reforms were so necessary. "These dogs don't just work with us," he explained, his voice full of emotion. "They become part of us, their family." As the sun set over the ranch, Victoria's crew captured footage of Margaret and Rex walking slowly along the property's fence line. The image was powerful. An elderly woman and a retired police dog, both defying expectations and changing the system through their unlikely partnership. The story had resonated with people because it spoke to universal truths about loyalty, compassion, and the courage to stand up for what's right. The morning air at Dr. Anderson's ranch was filled with excitement as preparations were underway for a special event. The Service Dog Retirement Foundation, Sarah's newly established organization, was hosting its first official gathering. Canine handlers, veterinarians, and supporters from across the state had come to participate in what was becoming a landmark moment in service animal welfare. Margaret watched from the porch as volunteers set up chairs and tables on the ranch's sprawling lawn. Rex lay beside her, his condition noticeably improved after weeks of dedicated care. The sight of him peacefully observing the activity below brought tears to her eyes, tears of joy for how far they'd come and determination for the work that still lay ahead. Victoria Bennett's documentary crew moved through the crowd, capturing interviews and candid moments. The filmmaker had become deeply invested in the story, seeing in it a powerful narrative about grassroots change and the unbreakable bond between humans and animals. Her cameras followed Rex as he received gentle pets and attention from visitors, his tail wagging with each new interaction. "You've started something remarkable here," Victoria told Margaret during a quiet moment. "This isn't just about one dog anymore. It's about changing how we view our responsibility to these animals who serve alongside us." She gestured to the gathering crowd below. "Every person here represents a ripple effect of what you did." Elizabeth had arrived early that morning with exciting news from Washington. The K-9 Heroes Care Act had gained significant momentum. With support from both parties, Congressman Whitaker's office had scheduled a formal hearing, and Elizabeth would be testifying alongside other experts about the need for comprehensive reform. "Mom," Elizabeth said, joining Margaret on the porch, "they want you to testify too. Your story, Rex's story, it's the heart of this whole movement." She watched as her mother's eyes widened in surprise. "You won't be alone. Officer Cooper and Dr. Anderson have also been invited to speak." Sarah worked tirelessly coordinating the event, her laptop balanced on her knees as she directed volunteers and managed social media updates simultaneously. The Foundation's website had already received hundreds of applications from people wanting to help, from offering homes for retired service dogs to providing professional services. Officer Jenny Martinez arrived with Captain Stevens, both out of uniform but carrying themselves with the pride of their profession. The captain had become an unexpected ally in the reform movement, using his influence to encourage other departments to re-examine their policies. His presence at the event sent a powerful message about institutional change. Dr. Anderson had set up a demonstration area where he conducted workshops on rehabilitation techniques for retired service dogs. Other veterinarians gathered around, taking notes and asking questions about his methods. Rex participated in a short demonstration showing how proper care and therapy could improve quality of life for aging service animals. The key is understanding that retirement isn't the end, Dr. Anderson explained to his colleagues. It's a new chapter that deserves just as much attention and care as their service years. His words resonated with the assembled professionals, many of whom had already begun implementing similar programs in their own practices. Clara Anderson moved through the crowd with her usual grace, ensuring everyone felt welcome. She had organized local food vendors to provide refreshments, creating a festival-like atmosphere that celebrated both the progress made and the community that had formed around the cause. As the afternoon progressed, Margaret found herself surrounded by people sharing their own stories. A retired handler from Sacramento spoke about his struggle to provide care for his former partner. A veterinarian from Oregon described how she had started a low-cost clinic specifically for service animals. Each story reinforced the importance of what they were fighting for. Officer Cooper spent time with Rex, their bond still evident despite their weeks apart. "You know," he said to Margaret, "when I first became a canine handler, they taught us to maintain professional distance from our partners. But that's impossible. These dogs give us everything they have. They deserve everything we can give them in return." The event had drawn media attention from across the country. News crews captured footage of Rex interacting with visitors, his mobility issues evident, but his spirit undimmed. The image of him, surrounded by supporters and receiving loving care, stood in stark contrast to the fate he had nearly faced weeks before. As the sun began to set, casting long shadows across the ranch, Margaret stood to address the gathered crowd. The moment felt surreal. This grandmother who had acted on pure instinct and love, now standing before cameras and supporters, her simple act of defiance having sparked a national movement. The hearing room in Washington, D.C. buzzed with anticipation as Margaret Thompson prepared to testify before the Congressional Committee on Public Service Animal Welfare. Rex, now officially her companion through a special arrangement with the San Diego Police Department, lay calmly at her feet. His presence in the historic chamber was itself a testament to how far they had come. Elizabeth sat beside her mother, legal documents spread before her on the polished wooden table. The younger Thompson had spent weeks preparing for this moment, working with animal rights lawyers and policy experts to ensure their testimony would have maximum impact. Captain Stevens and Officer Cooper waited in the row behind them, both in full-dress uniform, ready to lend their professional perspective to the proceedings. "Are you nervous?" Elizabeth whispered to her mother as photographers captured images of the scene. Margaret smiled, her hand steady as she reached down to pat Rex. "Not when I know we're doing the right thing," she replied, the same quiet determination in her voice that had started this journey. Back in San Diego, Sarah coordinated a live streaming event at Dr. Anderson's ranch. Hundreds of supporters had gathered to watch the proceedings, including many who had been part of the movement from the beginning. Victoria Bennett's documentary, Crew moved through the crowd, capturing the emotional reactions as Margaret prepared to speak. Dr. Anderson and Clara had transformed their ranch into a viewing center, with large screens set up on the lawn. The veterinarian had already submitted his written testimony about Rex's rehabilitation, complete with detailed medical records showing how proper care had improved the dog's condition. His evidence would be crucial in demonstrating that many retired service dogs could have quality lives with appropriate support. Congressman Whitaker opened the hearing with a powerful statement about responsibility and gratitude. These animals, "Serve our communities with unwavering loyalty," he declared, his voice filling the chamber. "Today we have the opportunity to ensure that loyalty is repaid with the care and respect they deserve." As Margaret began her testimony, her voice carried the weight of personal experience and moral conviction. She described finding Rex in the kennel, knowing his fate had been sealed by cold bureaucracy. She spoke of the nights spent planning his rescue, the risk she took, and the overwhelming support that followed. Throughout her speech, Rex remained by her side, a living embodiment of what they were fighting to protect. Officer Cooper's testimony followed, his professional demeanor occasionally cracking with emotion as he described his years working with Rex. He detailed specific incidents where the dog had saved lives, protected officers, and served with distinction. "These animals aren't equipment," he stated firmly. "They're officers in every sense of the word, and they deserve to be treated as such." Captain Stevens surprised many with his passionate advocacy for reform. The man who had once been prepared to enforce Rex's sentence now spoke eloquently about the need for systemic change. His transformation from enforcer to advocate carried particular weight with the committee members who understood the challenges of working within bureaucratic systems. In San Diego, Jenny Martinez watched the proceedings with tears in her eyes, surrounded by her fellow officers. Her small act of looking the other way had helped spark this movement, and now she was witnessing its culmination. The young officer had found her own voice in advocating for change within the department, helping to draft new protocols for canine care and retirement. Elizabeth presented the legal framework for the proposed legislation, her expertise evident as she fielded questions from committee members. The bill would mandate comprehensive health care for service animals during and after their active duty, establish retirement protocols that prioritize their welfare, and create funding mechanisms to support their care. Social media exploded with support as Margaret's testimony was shared worldwide. Sarah's foundation website crashed temporarily from the volume of visitors, all eager to be part of the growing movement. Messages of support poured in from law enforcement agencies, veterinary organizations, and animal lovers across the globe. As the hearing continued, Dr. Anderson's ranch had become a celebration of hope and change. Clara moved through the crowd, sharing stories with supporters and media representatives. The ranch itself had become a model for what service dog retirement could look like, with several other facilities across the country already adopting their rehabilitation programs. The power of Margaret's simple act of compassion had transformed into something far greater than anyone could have imagined. What began as one woman's stand against an unjust system had become a nationwide movement for reform, proving that sometimes the smallest acts of defiance could spark the greatest changes. The days following the congressional hearing brought a wave of changes that swept across the country. Police departments nationwide began revising their policies, not waiting for the legislation to pass before implementing reforms. The San Diego Police Department, under Captain Stevens' leadership, had become a model for others to follow, establishing comprehensive retirement protocols for their canine officers. At Dr. Anderson's ranch, now officially designated as the first service dog retirement and rehabilitation center, Rex continued his recovery. The old warrior had become something of a celebrity, with visitors often stopping by just to meet the dog who had inspired a movement. Margaret watched with quiet pride as he greeted each guest with gentle dignity, his condition steadily improving under the doctor's care. "You know," Dr. Anderson said one morning as he completed Rex's weekly checkup, "when you first brought him here, I thought we could give him a comfortable retirement. But he's exceeded all our expectations." The veterinarian showed Margaret the latest test results, pointing out the improvements in Rex's mobility and overall health. It just shows what proper care and love can do. Sarah's Service Dog Retirement Foundation had grown exponentially. What started as a social media campaign had evolved into a national organization with chapters in every state. The foundation worked to connect retired service dogs with qualified caregivers, provide medical support, and advocate for continued improvements in animal welfare policies. Elizabeth found herself increasingly in demand as a legal expert on animal welfare law. Law firms across the country sought her counsel on implementing the pending legislation, while police departments requested her help in drafting their new policies. "Mom," she said during one of her visits to the ranch, "I never thought your act of civil disobedience would lead to me specializing in service animal law." Officer Jenny Martinez had been promoted to head of the K-9 unit's new retirement transition program. Her experience with Rex's case had given her unique insights into the needs of retiring service dogs and their handlers. She worked closely with Dr. Anderson, implementing many of his rehabilitation techniques into the department's standard protocols. Victoria Bennett's documentary was nearing completion, with early screenings receiving emotional responses from audiences. The film chronicled not just Rex's story, but the larger movement it had inspired. Footage of Margaret's congressional testimony, interwoven with scenes from the ranch and interviews with handlers across the country, painted a powerful picture of transformation and hope. Clara Anderson had transformed the ranch's guest house into a proper rehabilitation center, complete with specialized equipment and comfortable recovery areas for the dogs. Other retired service dogs had joined Rex, creating a small community of four-legged heroes living out their golden years with dignity. The sound of happy barks and wagging tails had become a constant backdrop to the ranch's daily activities. Officer Cooper spent more time at the ranch than ever, having taken on a role as a trainer for new handlers in the department's revised K-9 program. He used Rex's story to teach young officers about the deep bond between handlers and their partners and the importance of advocating for their welfare. "This isn't just about following new protocols," he would tell them. "It's about honoring a partnership that goes beyond duty." Captain Stevens, once the face of bureaucratic resistance, had become one of the most vocal advocates for reform. His testimony about the department's transformation had influenced police chiefs across the country. "Sometimes it takes someone showing us our blind spots," he admitted during a national police conference. Mrs. Thompson didn't just save Rex. She helped us remember our humanity. The legislation was moving through Congress with strong bipartisan support. Congressman Whitaker's office reported that they had never seen such unanimous agreement on an animal welfare bill. The proposed law would ensure that no service dog would ever again face the situation Rex had encountered. Margaret found quiet moments to reflect on the whirlwind of changes her simple act had sparked. Sitting on the ranch's porch with Rex beside her, she watched the sunset paint the sky in brilliant colors. The once condemned police dog now moved with renewed energy, his spirit unbroken by age or illness. His journey from death row to beloved symbol of change had touched countless lives and transformed a system. 1 year after Margaret's daring rescue of Rex, the Service Dog Retirement and Rehabilitation Center at Anderson Ranch was hosting a special celebration. The occasion marked not only the anniversary of Rex's rescue, but also the official signing of the K-9 Heroes Care Act into law. The sprawling property had been transformed into a festival ground with hundreds of supporters, handlers, and their retired K-9 partners gathering to witness history being made. Margaret sat in a place of honor, Rex faithfully by her side. The old warrior had defied all expectations, his condition stabilized and even improved under Dr. Anderson's innovative care protocols. Though his muzzle had grown whiter and his steps remained measured, his eyes still sparkled with the same intelligence and loyalty that had characterized his years of service. "Look at all of this," Elizabeth whispered to her mother, gesturing at the gathered crowd. "Did you ever imagine that night would lead to this?" Margaret smiled, reaching down to scratch Rex behind his ears. The simple gesture that had become so natural over the past year carried the weight of their shared journey. Sarah had orchestrated the event masterfully, coordinating with media outlets and supporters nationwide. The Service Dog Retirement Foundation now operated facilities in 12 states, with more in development. Each center followed the model established at Anderson Ranch, providing specialized care and rehabilitation for retired service animals. Dr. Anderson moved through the crowd, sharing his expertise with visiting veterinarians. His rehabilitation methods had become the gold standard in service animal care, and veterinary schools across the country had begun incorporating his techniques into their curricula. Clara, ever the gracious hostess, ensured every guest felt welcome, her quiet support having been crucial to the ranch's success. Officer Jenny Martinez led a demonstration with the department's current K9 unit, showcasing the new training protocols that emphasized both performance and long-term health. The young officer had become a respected authority on service dog welfare, her experience with Rex's case informing her approach to handler training. Victoria Bennett's documentary had premiered to critical acclaim, winning several awards and bringing the issue of service animal welfare to an even broader audience. The filmmaker had captured not just the drama of Rex's rescue, but the heart of the movement it had inspired. Clips from the film played on screens around the property, reminding everyone of how far they had come. Captain Stevens, who had flown in specifically for the event, stood at the podium to address the gathering. "A year ago, I was on the wrong side of history," he admitted, his voice carrying across the hushed crowd. "Mrs. Thompson didn't just save one dog, she showed us all a better way forward. Today, every police department in the country has access to resources and support for their retired K9 officers, ensuring no dog will face what Rex did." Officer Cooper, now the department's lead K9 training coordinator, worked closely with new handlers to instill the values that the movement had championed. "The bond between handler and dog isn't just operational," he would tell his trainees. "It's a lifelong commitment that extends beyond active service." The celebration reached its peak as Congressman Whitaker, joined by a bipartisan group of supporters, conducted the official signing ceremony for the K9 Heroes Care Act. The comprehensive legislation ensured that all service dogs would receive proper medical care, rehabilitation, and retirement support. As the congressman signed the final document, cheers erupted from the assembled crowd. Margaret watched the proceedings with quiet satisfaction, remembering the night she had made the decision that changed everything. Rex pressed against her leg, his steady presence a reminder of why she had taken that risk. The condemned police dog had become a symbol of hope and change, his story touching hearts and transforming policies across the nation. Sarah approached, with a tablet, showing her grandmother the latest statistics from the foundation. Hundreds of retired service dogs had already benefited from the new programs, finding loving homes and receiving the care they deserved. Each success story carried forward the legacy of that one brave act, creating a ripple effect that continued to grow. As the afternoon sun cast long shadows across the ranch, Margaret found herself surrounded by well-wishers, each with their own story of how Rex's journey had inspired them. Veterinarians spoke of implementing new protocols, handlers shared stories of retirement plans for their partners, and ordinary citizens told of opening their homes to retired service dogs. The sunset painted the sky in brilliant hues of orange and purple as the celebration at Anderson Ranch began winding down. Margaret sat on her favorite spot on the porch, Rex contentedly lying at her feet, both of them watching the last rays of light dance across the property that had become a sanctuary for so many retired service dogs. The day's events had been more than just a celebration of the new law's signing. They represented the culmination of a journey that had started with one woman's courage to stand up against an unjust system. The ranch had become a living testament to what could be accomplished when compassion overcame bureaucracy. Dr. Anderson approached, carrying his latest medical reports on Rex. "You know, Margaret," he said, settling into a chair beside her, "when you first brought him here, I gave him maybe a few months of quality life. But look at him now." Rex's tail thumped against the wooden porch at the sound of the doctor's voice. "He's proof that every life has value. Every service deserves honor." Elizabeth joined them, having just finished a series of interviews with national news outlets. The story of Rex and Margaret had captured hearts across the country, becoming a symbol of hope and change. "Mom," she said, sitting down next to Margaret, "do you remember what you told me that first day when I was worried about the consequences? You said sometimes doing the right thing means taking risks." Sarah emerged from her makeshift office. In the guest house, where she had been coordinating with the Foundation's new chapters across the country, the organization had already helped hundreds of retired service dogs find loving homes and proper medical care. "Grandma," she called out, holding up her tablet, "you won't believe this. We just got approval for 5 more rehabilitation centers across the country." Officer Jenny Martinez arrived with a special surprise, a new class of K9 handlers from the police academy. These young officers had been trained under the new protocols, understanding from day one that their partnership with their dogs was a lifelong commitment. They gathered around Margaret and Rex, eager to hear firsthand the story that had changed their profession. Captain Stevens, who had remained for the evening festivities, stood at the edge of the porch, observing the scene with evident emotion. The man who had once been prepared to enforce Rex's sentence had become one of the strongest advocates for change. "Sometimes," he mused aloud, "it takes someone showing us our blind spots to help us see the bigger picture." Victoria, Bennett's documentary crew, captured these quiet moments, understanding that they were just as important as the day's grand ceremonies. The filmmaker had learned that the real story wasn't just about saving one dog. It was about how a single act of compassion could spark a movement that transformed an entire system. Clara Anderson brought out coffee and her famous homemade cookies, turning the porch into an impromptu gathering space. The scene was informal but powerful. Police officers, veterinarians, activists, and animal lovers, all united by their commitment to ensuring better lives for service animals. As night fell, the property's new lighting system illuminated the pathways between the rehabilitation areas. The soft glow revealed other retired K9s in their comfortable quarters, each with their own story, each now guaranteed a dignified retirement thanks to the movement that Rex had inspired. Margaret looked out over the property, remembering the fear and uncertainty of that night when she had made her decision to act. Rex had been just one dog then, facing a harsh end to a life of service. Now he represented hope for countless others, his story ensuring that no other service dog would face the same fate. Officer Cooper, who had stayed until the end of the celebrations, approached with his new K9 partner. The young dog wagged his tail at Rex, who responded with the dignified patience of a senior officer. "You know," Cooper said, kneeling beside his former partner, "because of you two, this pup here will never have to worry about his future. That's a legacy to be proud of." As the stars began to appear in the clear California sky, Margaret reflected on the journey that had brought them here. What had started as an act of defiance had grown into something far greater. A movement that had changed laws, transformed policies, and most importantly, touched hearts. Rex shifted slightly, resting his head on Margaret's foot, his eyes peaceful and content. In that quiet moment, surrounded by the community they had helped build, Margaret knew that sometimes the greatest acts of courage come not from following rules, but from following your heart. Dear listeners, we hope Rex and Margaret's story has touched your hearts as deeply as it has touched ours. Their journey reminds us that every act of compassion, no matter how small it may seem, has the power to create lasting change. If this story moved you, please subscribe to our channel and give this video a like. Join our community where we share more inspiring tales that celebrate the extraordinary bonds between humans and animals. Share your thoughts in the comments below. We'd love to hear how this story resonated with you. Until our next adventure. Together, remember that one person's courage can spark a revolution of kindness.